Your guys was good. Welcome back to another Jacked podcast. This is the actual Jacked one.
We gotta sing.
Yeah, we got a fun guest, lots of knowledge. Before I let him introduce himself a little bit, but just my intro for him. I met Brandon back in I think 2020, end of 2020 or start of 2021. And I met him through Project Rise, Charan and Mike. They recommended me to him for I had like a shoulder thing on my left side, some like internal rotation or like thoracic extension or like I just couldn't get shoulder mobility because I did a lot of Brampton reps and I still do a good amount of Brampton reps. But basically, long story short, went to him for some shoulder health, and basically he brought me in for one appointment, bro. And then he showed me a few drills in the back, and he did some whatever Cairo stuff, that smart stuff, right? And then next time he's like, bro, you just need like a 10-minute appointment. He came back in, and then he showed me a few more drills, and then I literally never went back again because my shoulder was fine after that, right? And that was one of the biggest things that kind of stood out right away because like a lot of times, like I see this with my dad right now. He goes to like some physio and he goes every Tuesday, 6 p.m. for like the last like 10 weeks, and every morning his shoulder still hurts. I was like, bro, is this helping? He's like, yeah, in the moment it helps because they stretch it out, right? And I always tell people, like, go to Brandon or go to that area because you have a bunch of practitioners under you. Because bro, like I was actually doing stuff outside the gym after I met with you, right? It's not just like,
Love
okay,
it.
you come to the session, you keep coming back. And that stood out to me right away. And I've tried anytime somebody asks me in that area, I'm like, yo, go to the lab per se. But that was my intro to him. And I'll let you do your honors per se in terms of your background. What do you do? Talk about the lab and give us a little bit of an intro before we add some value.
All right. I'm Brenden. I'm a sports car at the lab. I founded the lab 4.5 years ago now. The team has grown to 30 staff. We have all kinds of practitioners on board: chiro, physio, massage, osteo. But the one thing that unites all of us is we all have a solid strength and conditioning foundation and implement a lot of that because the population that we see is active, whether it's athletes, pro athletes, recreational athletes, weekend athletes, people that go to the gym 5 days a week, runners, whatever the case is, we deal with an active population. And because of that, our understanding in strength and conditioning, I think, has to exceed what people have come to expect from practitioners in general.
Okay. Wicked. See again right away. It just starts off with making sure everyone has the background of actually helping somebody in that area, right? I want to quickly, before we dive into the actual value, I guess this is more like a selfish question for me, but like, what made you start off in like starting your own business, right? Like your own clinic 4.5 years ago? Were you already like thinking about being a chiro physio, or what was the path to getting to the lab? Because I'm sure.
Yeah, I'll give you my condensed version. So I went to school to
Yeah.
play soccer
Okay.
a long time ago. I'm old now. But I went to school to play soccer, and during that time, I had a lot of injuries that I dealt with. Obviously, the sports science was not where it needed to be, so there was a ton of volume. There wasn't a big emphasis on recovery, and a lot of guys were injured, and it was just shit care, the usual throw a few pads on or whatever the case may be. And so when I finished school and soccer, there was no real opportunity in Canada, so I decided that I wanted to stay in the industry. And so I actually didn't want to be a chiro, to be honest with you. I had started shadowing at a few places and I got a taste of, I guess, what people expect when they hear chiro. And I was completely turned off by the profession. It took a personal injury from myself to a back injury to seek a chiro who was exactly what I wanted to emulate in practice. And long story short, he took me under his wing. I started working at his clinic, and I thought that I would like to see a more active population. And so in 2019, I went on my own. 2020, the gym I was in closed down because of the pandemic, and it kind of forced my hand to open up my own space if I wanted to continue to practice. And so I opened up the lab on an impulse, and 4.5 years later, here we are.
Amazing. Like a sec. Okay, so Kegs, I think you were talking before this. about like the because we could dive into the injuries part first. I think that might relate to your story as well a little bit. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons when somebody is not getting jacked is because they just keep going to the gym, they keep getting hurt. They're like, I'm gonna just take time off and I'm gonna, come back when I'm rested, and they come back and they just get injured again. It's like a cyclical thing, and they're like, yo, F it, it doesn't work for me, right? But Kegs, you were mentioning before about the injury stuff. So talk
Yeah.
about
So one of the big questions I had, or one of the big things I get from my clients is like, yo, I'm hurt. Should I go work out? And a lot of times it depends on the injury, right? But like, what would you recommend in terms of, okay, if someone has an injury, when should they work out? When should they not work out? Should they do what they can, or should they just kind of stay and rest till everything feels better?
That's a question we get all the time, man. In my honest professional opinion, I think there are very few instances where somebody should absolutely refrain from any kind of physical activity. Barring a catastrophic back injury, a ligament rupture, and a tendon rupture, and even in the ligament and the tendon ruptures, you can still work other areas of your body. So I'm big on continuing to be active. As we speak, actually, I blew up my ankle last week, Monday, at soccer, and it's shitty. It happens to us therapists too. I haven't been able to train legs for 9 days, but I've been going to the gym. I've been stationary biking. I've been doing upper body 3 to 4 times a week. So I'm a big, big, big proponent, and I think the lab as a whole is of at least trying to do things that aren't painful and modifying around the body part that is painful for the short term, not forever.
100%. I'd say
and
that's why I pretty much send everyone I know to the lab because I know like if I get someone and they're gonna when I tell them as a personal trainer, it's different, but when they hear it as someone who's a practitioner, there's a lot more confidence and there's a lot more sort of trust in that relationship, right? And that's why when you have guys like yourself or when you have practitioners like yourself who are out there putting that message, it makes things a lot easier for anyone else in that position, right?
100%,
yeah,
man. A lot of the times people just need to hear that they're okay. You know what I mean? That's half of my job is just walking people off the ledge and letting them know that you're okay to exercise. You're going to get back to your sport. Even in the worst, Achilles ruptures or ACL tears, you can do things in the gym. You can be active still. You don't have to completely abandon your fitness lifestyle.
it's it's just kind of funny, right? Like what's that cheesy saying? Movement is medicine, right? And it's like it stands true even to the highest level, right? The severity of the injury or injury is not that crazy. Movement is gonna get you out of that discomfort instead of the what traditional way of like the rest, right? You just sit down, ice it, and just sit there the whole time, and then come back, and it's the same thing. So one quick, let's take a step back. Say for example, someone is healthy, they're jacked, they're going to the gym, they're regular. What are some things in the gym itself they can do to mitigate potential injuries in the future? Like what can, because you were mentioning for your when you're playing soccer, you didn't know the balance between recovery and training, right? Or you didn't know like okay how much volume to do because you were just sending it and then you weren't recovering enough, right? So can you touch on like how can someone mitigate even getting injured?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's instances in time where we can't prevent that, right? And these,
For
like for
sure.
example, my ankle, like I can't prevent someone coming in and slide tackling me while my foot's planted. You know what I
For
mean?
sure.
As much as we'd love to, but those are extrinsic factors. For intrinsic stuff, there's so much that we can do to prevent. I mean, the biggest thing I think is proper programming, proper loading, having days carved out for recovery. And even when we're talking recovery, I'm talking an active recovery, being on a bike, doing some mobility drills. In terms of soft tissue injuries, we can look at warm ups. And in specific, are you the guy that does the same 5 warm up drills, no matter if you're doing bench press, squats, or deadlifts? Being very specific with your warm ups as it pertains to the exercise regimen coming up. Low hanging fruit like sleep, man. Sleep is by far the most important recovery tool there is out there over any massage guns or anything like that. And the research has shown that people that don't sleep enough have higher rates of injuries. So just from the bottom to the top, sleep, proper programming, and then doing things you can pre warm up to mitigate injury during the workout. Those are the big three.
Can we dive into squat bench deadlift a little bit? Because I'm sure like people watching right now, like they like squat bench deadlifting. They like getting jacked, right? Especially bench, you know. I don't know how much you bench, but I won't ask you that right now because your ankle's messed up. Probably can't use leg drive. But for say for example, benching, squatting, deadlifting, can you maybe just give like a couple samples of like for like benching, what would be like a general, obviously it's gonna depend individual to individual, depending on
Yep.
their mobility, all that stuff. But what would be like a general way of somebody thinking out their drills before benching, maybe?
Yeah, it's a good question. So, I mean, my warm up prescription is pretty similar across the board, and then it just changes at the last step. So, the first one is just getting your core temperature up, increasing the core temperature, getting your muscles warm, getting the tendons to be a little stretchy. The second thing I'll run through if people have time for it is some self release on a foam roller, lacrosse ball, whatever sore on the day. You can work through that. And then the third is the important one where we start to differentiate. And what you want to do is basically look at the demands of what joints and muscles are in play. So, for example, if I am bench pressing, what do my arms need to do? They need to go behind me. They need to be loaded. So I'm going to incorporate a lot of shoulder mobility exercises with some specific, I guess, importance based on rotation and how far we can move the shoulder behind us, getting that tendon and tissue warm. If I'm getting into a squat, I'm looking at hips and I'm looking at knees and I'm looking at ankles. And if we want to dive further, if I'm looking at a front squat versus a back squat, if I'm front squatting, I'm also looking at the T spine as a warm up. So, for example, if I'm getting to a squat warm up, let's say, I would start with a bike for a few minutes, get warm. I would, if I had some time, I'd roll up the quads, the hips, the calves, and then I would start with some mobility drills on hip rotation, 90-90s, pigeons, that kind of stuff, kettlebell shifts. Then I would dive into the knee. I would look at some of the tendon health, whether it's wall sits or whatever it is. And then I'd get into the ankle, some dorsiflexion, some calf raises. And then I would start with trying to mimic the workout coming up and doing 2 to 3 warm up sets, building up to a top set. So
Awesome.
you start non-specific and then you gradually get more specific as you get into your warm up.
Amazing. I remember throwing in when I did 1, 2 sessions with you. I think it was like a wall rotation, like you're just sitting and doing a near the wall and basically have like a medicine ball and you're rotating.
Yeah,
That one, and then sitting on the wall across with my back pushed against it, and then I think it was like almost like a Z press, but like with
yep,
just my hands without arching the low back. Um,
yep.
that was wicked. And so T spine, you mean like middle of the back, right? 'Cause we got a bunch of bros,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
we don't know
yeah.
what T spine is, you know. So when
T-spine is middle of your back, exactly. And again, it's really just dependent on the exercises you choose. If you're back
okay,
squatting, you probably don't need to warm that up as much. If you're front squatting or overhead squatting, absolutely you need to.
so why is warming up the middle of the back important if someone's front squatting or overhead pressing? Like what's the
Because that area needs to be able to extend. It needs to be able to arch backwards. And if I'm back squatting, I'm almost hinging forward. If
okay.
I'm front squatting, I'm completely upright, and that T-spine needs to be able to arch.
Okay, so because a lot of people, when we do overhead pressing, we press and then the low back always arches, right?
Exactly.
So we don't want the low back arching like crazy. You want to arch to the mid back.
Ideally, yeah.
Okay, cool. That's good to know. A lot of people live like a low back arching. That's what they have been taught for so long, right? Chest up, arch the low back.
Yep.
So yeah, it's good to know from a professional. We're not saying it. Professionals saying it.
Saying it. I think a lot of people they kind of fall into two categories when it comes to warm ups. They either don't warm up at all or they warm up for a very, very long time. And sometimes it's most of their workout is a warm up. Do you have a sort of general range in terms of how long should someone spend warming up or like how much of their workout should consist of prepping them for their drills? Or sorry, for their
Yeah,
work.
I usually say like it should be anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes, including everything. I prefer a very specific warm up. I mean, it's the classic case of like I went to see my physio and they gave me 17 exercises for homework and I have to do the whole routine before I work out. I would rather, stand back with a sniper rifle and just pick off things that I know that we're going to be using And that's the stuff that we should focus on before that specific lift or workout.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. Instead of
This
just whatever, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
this makes my head because like I took prescript, right? And those guys had similar exactly like stuff you're saying. You got thrown off by the whole Cairo scene because like the way it was kind of set up, and those guys had the same story. They were like, we were like, you know what, we're gonna step out of this and create our own course that actually gives people rehab and like specific things like snipers instead of you're just like doing 17 drills for your warm ups and doing that for your whole life, right? And never really improves. So I don't know why we don't want to go into industry talk. We want to keep helping the people. But we'll touch on in the end, maybe, talking about some advice. Because a lot of people, I think in our industry, personal trainers, Kags, I think you were saying too, you wanted to be like a physio or chiro before, right?
I
Maybe? I
wanted
don't
to,
know.
I don't know, Brendan, if you remember, but I came and shadowed you one time. Came and shadowed you twice,
Yeah, I
actually.
do. I remember, man.
Yeah, so I came because I hurt my back. I think I saw Casey at the time. Saw Casey, you poked your head in through the door. Shadowed Casey for a session, shadowed yourself for a session. And yeah, we kind of talked about the industry. And big thing that kind of turned me off from the industry was I think something else similar to you, where it just looked like kind of like a human factory where people just kind of coming in and they churn them out and you see them every single week and you weren't really helping the person or their cause. And I saw how you guys are taking care of people. I saw you guys how you took care of me, how you took care of Rona, and like that sort of resonated with like, oh shit, like this is kind of how I want to do things, right? Um, why I'm a coach today, Brennan, I think you were like, I was a personal trainer for a long time. Should have a really good understanding of the body and how people train. So I was like, fuck it. I literally took that advice and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. And I think that's such a big part in being able to help people. It's like if you can understand how what you told me was how you can how someone can move, how someone can work, understand the anatomy. When it comes to rehab, that's just like another level to that. But if you don't understand that very well, then it becomes hard to apply rehab, right? And you just kind of turn into what you kind of dread. So
Not,
Yeah,
bro. So like,
100%, man. Go
yeah,
on.
go ahead. You're gonna say something.
No, I was just gonna say, I don't think that therapists are well equipped to handle an athletic population if you don't understand it or have done it yourself.
Yeah.
You can't, if you don't understand the demands of soccer, basketball, weightlifting, how can you rehab somebody effectively to get back and not have the same thing happen again? You know?
Gotcha. So I want to kind of shift. So first off, shout out to the lab. If you haven't checked out the lab, please go to Mississauga and get your shit done. Um, Wicked. And again, it's I think one of the things Kag just mentioned. He literally learned from a couple shadowing sessions. And I know for a fact I learned too because even though I was taking prescript at the time, the drills Brandon gave, they literally lined up with what they were talking about. They're like thoracic extension, rotation, internal rotation, external rotation. Make sure you do some sort of like passive work to soft tissue work to warm up the heart and then go into specific drills. And seeing Brandon actually applying all these things, I was like, oh damn, I can apply it. So yes, somebody trying to just like expedite the process instead of trying to figure out and going to a physio every 3 months or whatever it is, check the lab out. They'll go a long way. But returning back to somebody in the gym, because gym bro, we're trying to get jacked. Now we've done the warm up part, right? When it comes to training itself, and obviously you train, and not legs right now because the ankle, but you do 3 even upper body days, all that stuff. But you've obviously been training and lifting weights in the gym alongside doing all the chiro stuff. How, okay, we know the importance of it. I'm not gonna dive into that. That's bullshit. I mean, Google importance of lifting weights and getting jacked, okay? But say the person is lifting, what can they do in the programming itself, like lifting wise, after the warm up is done, whether it's like execution, whatever it is, how can they train smarter to get the most out of their training itself, but also not get hurt long term and keep getting stronger and jacker?
I mean, this is more up your alley, but I think the biggest thing is you probably see these guys are in the gym for like an hour and a half doing 15 exercises.
Yeah,
So I think the first thing is having a goal and trying to execute on that plan and not just doing 17 exercises when you're in the gym. The second obviously is exercise order. You want to hit the big taxing exercises early in your workout, not when you're exhausted and you could potentially pull something. The third is working with someone, man. Having somebody program and program your rest days and program the rest of your workout schedule. That's extremely important and so undervalued because that could be the difference between you hitting your goals and getting injured. You know what I mean?
100%. So what are some common things maybe like because obviously you deal with a good amount of variety of people and a good amount of active people. Are there common gym stuff that people come with? Like, hey, I did this in the gym or this is in the gym. Now I have this injury or discomfort. Are there any common things you see on like a general level?
Yeah, I think if we're talking about gym specifically, I mean, if we're looking at sports, there's different injury profiles for that. But if we're
100%.
looking at gym injury specifically, a big one is obviously the I threw my back out, whether it was an improper deadlift, whether it was a bent over row that was done wrong, an RDL. That's a big one. Another big one is pinching in the hips in a squat or some sort of hip pain or pinchy hips. And then you have the shoulders. There's a cascade of different conditions, but bicep tendonitis, shoulder impingement, and a lot of these are not outside of the back. A lot of the hip and shoulder injuries are an accumulation of an injury that wasn't taken care of effectively and just continued to snowball.
Mm,
And then you also have the big traumatic, oh shit, I blew my back out. But
yeah.
those are when it comes to lifting, that's what we see a lot of.
So can we dive into a couple of case studies maybe? Like not specific individuals obviously, but say for example, yo, I blew my back out. A guy comes in, obviously you do your assessment, all that stuff. But in a general sense, do you see any common things within those blew my
Yep.
back out? And then what's
Yeah,
the
for sure.
yeah,
The big one is number one, a lot of guys don't know how to brace, which is absurd because you get guys that are pulling 315, 405, 500 pounds off the ground and have no idea how to brace their core.
wow.
So the biggest one I think is just being able to brace, being able to protect your back. Then the second is not being able to hinge effectively, whether that's a loss of motion through the hamstrings, posterior chain, hips. That tends to be a big one as well. And the third is programming. We get a lot of guys that hop on Smolov or 531 or powerlifting, and the amount of volume relative to their training experience just doesn't make sense. And everyone is sold this promise with these programs, but I think it should be meant for a very select certain few.
I want to dive into hip hinge because I don't know what it is, if it's just like the brown guys, but we can't move our hips for some reason. Um, like everyone, whoever does like RDL is always all low back or like we're just straightening out the legs. What are some things you can cue or like what are some drills maybe that you usually recommend to improve someone's hip hinge after maybe you've done like soft tissue stuff or whatever you've done? Something in the gym someone can apply to improve hip hinge.
It, it's tough to explain how to demo without actually
I know,
showing you, but there's
I
two
know.
that I really like to use. The first is having a broomstick along their back and telling them to get parallel to the ground while maintaining contact. I
Nice.
think you know what I'm talking about. It's one of the more
Yep,
common ones.
yep. I'll throw it up.
And the second is,
Image right here.
setting them up about a foot and a half from the wall and telling them get your ass to touch the wall with and get parallel to the ground.
Yeah,
And those are two really big ones. And you'll see a lot of these acute backs have no idea when they're healthy how to do that, let alone throw 415 pounds on a deadlift while doing that.
100%. So, say for example, the guy comes in, it's like, "Yo, bro, Brandon, I blew my back out." You know, in the back of your mind that okay, this program doesn't make sense for him, his experience wise. He doesn't know how to hip hinge, or like he doesn't know how to brace, right? How do you go on about teaching that person of like first maybe the bracing, right? Or like, because you obviously you're not gonna tell them, "Yo, bro, your program sucks," right? I don't know if you tell them, maybe you do. But like, how would
Maybe.
you tell? Maybe depends on the person, right? But what would you
Yeah,
do to
yeah.
like get them out of that back thing? Besides obviously the Cairo stuff, is there any practical things people can maybe do at home if like someone's watching while they're breaking their back right now? Or actually, hopefully they're not, but you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is like the first step is obviously getting them out of pain, right? People don't want to
Crucial.
move when they're in pain. So the first step is clinical stuff, getting people out of pain. The
Okay.
second, I think the most important one would be an abdominal brace and teaching them how to brace while being able to breathe. Not
Okay.
being out of breath from holding your breath the whole time or not having to use a belt every time you have to pick up something. Once we finish that, I will usually start with teaching how to hinge. And if they can hinge, I would start with the regressed range or a lower weight and then work up towards what they were working at.
Got you. And bracing specifically, I think kegs, you touched on this for squatting too and deadlifting too. But for bracing, is there specific things you tell them to think about, or do you just like show them literally in person? Because that's something you have to demo, right? Like, how can someone
Yeah,
cue? Yeah.
the biggest thing is keeping the ribs down, not having the ribs flare up, and then
Okay.
trying to expand 360 degrees around the abdomen, not just through the front. You want to expand as you breathe through the sides and the back. Um, that's it's tough to visualize without me actually showing you, but
Yeah.
a lot of guys don't have that amount of core control, and if you're lifting heavy ass weights or doing it with regularity, it's something that is a skill you need to learn.
Are there any exercises you recommend to improve bracing, or is it more just like
Yeah,
practicing the brace?
the big one is bracing and also being able to breathe, being able to control and regulate intra-abdominal pressure. So
Okay.
that's literally the exercise, maintaining a brace and trying to breathe in and out through your belly.
Is there something like because I know I've done this in the past where lying down on the ground with the back
Yeah,
against the floor breathing. Because
yeah.
I think I used to do this a lot is like I used to breathe into my upper chest constantly. Like I would just breathe like that into the traps, my low back would extend. So is there specific drills you recommend for improving breathing or telling them just breathe
That
through the belly?
that one is a good one. And then I like to use a lot of like tactile feedback. So whether that's putting a band underneath them and telling them to push into it, or
Got you.
having their own hands on their belly and being able to expand and contract the abdomen. But
Okay.
having someone feel it is a really good tool.
Okay, perfect. So breathing, bracing, kegs. You're gonna say something?
I'm gonna say, like, say you've addressed that. Say someone gets hurt, they come in, you do all the treatment stuff, you give them their action items. Outside of their mobility stuff that you tell them to do, outside of like all the programming, whatever, what are some ways that someone can expedite that healing process so they get back to doing what they need to do as fast as possible? I know you touched on sleep. I'm assuming that's probably a big part of it. What are some other things that they should kind of focus on to make sure they get back to doing what they need to do?
The biggest thing for me is getting them moving ASAP. I mean, not just, the yes, there is a psychological aspect to having somebody who's injured start moving. They start to think they're able and capable again, and they get back to exercise faster. But from a physiological point of view, you get your muscles pumping blood around the system. You get the waste from the injury being taken out, new tissue being laid down. So the first thing is just getting somebody to start moving immediately and in a pain-free manner, to the maximum that they can at the time, and then progressing from there. Um, Sleep, nutrition, low-hanging fruits, eating well, sleeping a lot. Those are the oldest recovery tools in the book. Um,
Yeah,
Honestly,
honestly, yeah, honestly, like it's cool to see like you saying the. It sounds basic per se, but these are things that takes individual 99% of the way, right? And people try to overcomplicate things. They'll Google stuff. They'll be like, "Listen to Trying to Get Jack podcast," right? They'll be like, "Let me learn something cool," but it's like, yo, you learn. Yes, you have to be more specific with your warm ups. You learn, okay, bracing, hip hinging. Once you know all that stuff, it's like you have to still do the other stuff as well, the sleep, the nutrition, making sure you're moving consistently, making sure you're not just going ham in the gym doing so much volume, right? So it's good to see you saying that because you're an actual practitioner. And sometimes, like Kegs was mentioning, as personal trainers, people can be like, okay, yeah, like, bro, my back hurts. I'm just gonna take 9 months off. But it's like, hey, like, the goal here is to make you move as soon as possible, not sit down for 9 months, right? And then caveat to that is like you sit down for 9 months, you gain 50 pounds, now your back pain is probably gonna be worse. So don't sit down for 9 months. Okay, so I want to kind of dive into a little bit because I think we added a good amount of value, and I wanted to touch on shoulders a little bit too, because that's something where a lot of people like, hey, my left shoulder always hurts or my right shoulder always hurts. When we're pressing, doing dumbbell press, elbows two in, elbows two out, whatever it is for shoulders, because I know for low back, lower body in general, we kind of gave good amount of hip stuff, bracing, hip hinge. For shoulders, is there some specific drills you would recommend that I know you mentioned T-spine, all that stuff, but it's something implement at the gym right away for shoulder health?
I mean, I could talk for an hour about just shoulders because it's such a complex joint,
I know.
four articulations, 27 muscles. But I think the biggest thing that people have to understand with shoulders is it's a ball and socket, which means that it doesn't work if it doesn't rotate. You
Okay.
know, you can't make a ball and socket move without rotation at some area. So the first thing that I would work on is rotation of the joint, specifically internal and external.
Okay.
Um, but there are drills that we can get into. It's really client or patient specific. You know, it
Yeah.
depends on your. If you're a pitcher, I'm gonna focus a lot on external rotation of the shoulder. If you are a general bodybuilder, I'm gonna focus on both. You know what I mean? So I think it
Okay.
depends on the person's goals, but the biggest thing is you always see guys, you know, they get to the gym, they get to the bench, they grab the 5 pounds and they start doing the external rotations from zero, just going crazy,
Yeah.
thinking they're warming up their rotator cuff, and then they get into benching.
Yeah.
And the shoulder is so much more than a YouTube rotator cuff drill. You gotta make sure that the joint works before you start to load it up. So some drills that I like to prescribe just off the top to bodybuilders or weightlifters. Sleeper stretch is a great one.
Okay.
I like to use tails and rails, shoulder cars. These are just things off the top of my head that really, really drive shoulder rotation, which are very important.
And then when you're doing these drills, are you doing it for like reps and sets, or are you doing it for like breaths? There's different ways people do them. What do you recommend?
Yeah, it depends on the exercise. If we're looking at mobility, it's usually time under tension.
Okay.
You're gonna have, over reps. And another thing is you want to go slow. A lot of guys will, back to the rotator cuff, they'll grab it and then just do 20 reps in 10 seconds and then start bench pressing.
Yeah.
When it comes to joints and mobility, slow is king.
Why do we need to do it slower?
You have the tissue under load for a longer period of time and it can adapt better to that. It's like weightlifting. If I'm doing a bicep curl in zero point 0.1 seconds, how much of that is the muscle working and how much is momentum?
Okay.
Versus if I'm doing a bicep curl, try doing a 15-second bicep curl,
Crazy.
right? Think about the amount
Decent
of
help.
tissue adaptation that's going to happen there. So you get a lot more adaptation when tissues are under stress for longer.
So we're getting mobility adaptation in this case for the.
Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
mobility is really just an arm of strength training, right? You're just
Yeah.
training the small intrinsic muscles of the joint as well as the tissue in the joint. And while we're at it, like my job is really just an extension of you guys. I use principles that you use
Yeah.
to get people out of seeing me and into higher performance stuff.
Got you. So first step, go to the lab. Second step, ask me or Kens. Was good, right? Now it makes sense. It's cool, right? So it's cool. Everything kind of combines together, and that's how it should be. It should be something where like someone goes and applies it outside of the clinic, and then so this leads into this is more I don't know who is gonna get value from this except us maybe. So people who are starting their own thing, maybe they want to become a personal trainer, chiro, physio, right? What are like I don't want to say top three, whatever, but like top couple advice tips or whatever you would say when somebody's starting their own thing or running their own practice, practitioners wise, what would you say someone just getting into the field or they've been in it for a minute? Obviously, you have good experience.
Such a loaded question, man. Um, I think the biggest thing is just finding a niche, and
Okay.
a niche that not only a niche that you want to be in, but a niche that you have experience or you're good in or are willing to get better in. So our niche, for example, is sports injury management. So you're going to turn away like a lot of the older people with arthritis aren't going to see us. A bunch of other cases aren't going to see us, but the people that we want to see are going to walk through our doors. The gym bros, the athletes, the dancers, the swimmers, the runners, and those are the populations that we work with because that is what our specialty is. And I think too many, yes, when we first started, I would take anybody that came into my office. But as the business has grown, we have the blessing, I guess, to turn away people that wouldn't work well with us or wouldn't fit into our model. So the first thing I'd recommend is finding a niche and really, really, really doing everything you can to hyper target everybody in that niche, because they're all looking for someone like you. You know what I mean? Like we've had so many people that have come in and been like, "Man, I wish I knew you when I played soccer," or "Man, I wish I knew you when I first did this injury." So just finding a niche is the biggest one for me, I think.
And then the second part, I guess, so I won't make it as I'll make it more specific. Say for example, one of the biggest things when it comes to doing your own thing is like, okay, you need to gain more clientele or like You want to obviously you're running something, especially like you had overhead of actually having an in-person space, right? So when someone's in that phase of like starting and they're like looking for, they want to have clients, and yes, niche is important, and 100% like in hindsight that has worked really well. And majority, the biggest business owners say the same thing. It's like, yo, you want to have a focus, right? You want to be a sniper with it. You don't want to just shotgun splatter everywhere. But say somebody's in that scarcity mindset in the start, and they're like, I just need clients. I just need clients, right? What would you maybe say to that person of like, hey, how can you get through that phase? Like, what are some things you can do on a daily basis, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think the first thing is leveraging your existing client base. Like for example, a lot of the guys that I had first seen introduced me to other athletes, introduced me to other teams, introduced me to other organizations, and I was able to grow it from there. Sorry, I was getting a
Awesome.
call.
No worries.
So that's the big one. Another thing is, a lot of people aren't willing to put in the hours and the time and the amount of work required. You guys are seeing the lab after 4.5 years. I was on my own for 2 years before the lab in a small room, just
Mm,
myself, working 12 to 14-hour days. And when I had a break, I would run around and hand out flyers and cold call or cold email organizations and just try and get my face out there. So you have to be prepared to eat shit for the first little bit, until you have the ability to turn people away that don't fit your business.
can you dive into a little bit of that? The before the 4.5 years, so like the 2 years, and then before the 2 years, maybe like that got you into you started with
Okay,
those.
so yeah.
Yeah.
So I first finished school in 2017. I got
Okay.
hired at a clinic, and they were fantastic. They were great to me, but I just found that I wasn't seeing the patient base that I wanted, and so I had started seeing a few athletes on the side, and they said, "Hey, we have a room in this giant training facility where all of us train. Come and open up space." So the lab 1.0 was a one room in a gym with a portable table and
Okay.
very little. And I just slaved away, and eventually had enough money to buy nicer things. Um, or built a second room in there and had 3 staff. And so, I would have maybe 5 patients a day and an hour and a half between each patient. And in that hour and a half, I'd be running around. I'd be going to booster juice, dropping off flyers, going to the school, trying to talk to the gym department, like just hustling, man, 24/7. Until it got to the point where I could hire some staff or buy nicer things. And now my role has changed. I'm still there treating, but my role is to grow the business, bring on teams, use my expertise with the higher level athletes. So I think, yeah, I ate shit for a lot
That
of years, man. I mean,
yeah.
2024 now, it's 7 years in the game hustling.
That's what I was gonna just say. So it's actually like the lab 7 years, 4.5. It's still a lot of time, right? When you see 7 years, like okay, cool. Like you're reaching that decade point, and even before that, it's like you studying all those stuff, all those things accumulate, right? And then even you having that connection with those that athletic facility, all those athletes. I'm sure that was also something you built up prior with the
Yep.
clinic, and then you started. So like you working, then starting point one, and then this is like probably 8, 9 years we're talking, right? So
Yeah.
people don't see that in hindsight, right? Before it gets too dark. Kags, any more questions before I let you guys go?
No, I'm good. That was great.
Any other practical tips, Brandon, or anything else you want to add on? Anything you want to say? We'll kind of have you on again, dive into specific things. Like I want to just do like a shoulder podcast or like a back, so we can dive into deeper things. But I
Yeah.
think this was a good get to know. But any last words, importance of getting jacked, all the good stuff.
No, man, I think we touched on a lot. It was actually pretty good.
Awesome. Well, where can people find the lab? Instagram, I'll put everything in there, but if you want to just give your Instagram, all that
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah. You can find us at the Lab Sports Med. We're a sports clinic in Mississauga, 4-3 in Winston Churchill. Yeah, man, that's it. Labsportsmed.ca, that's our website. So I would love to see you guys there.
Wicked, bro. Thank you so much, man. It was
Thank you,
wicked.
bro.
All right, guys, thanks for having me.
Yes, sir. Bye.